Ire.
Hi.
So we're on the third video now. We talked about like your journey, also a bit more about things that you're excited about, like Jamstack, serverless, and also saw that you talk about a lot about accessibility. And I was wondering, like, why, if you can explain, like, first, what is accessibility and why is it important? That would be great.
Okay. So accessibility is really just about making your website or app or whatever work for as many people as possible. So that's like making it accessible, essentially. So thinking about the different ways that people might be accessing your websites. So people maybe not using a mouse, maybe they're using their keyboard or using like a screen reader, or I don't know, multitude of ways that people could be using your sites, and just kind of thinking about that in the process and trying to make your site as adaptable as possible, and just making sure that it does actually function for all those people. And why is it important? Well, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious why it's important, but in the talks that I give, I try to explain to people that, because I think people tend to think of, okay, accessibility, making your website work for, let's say, like a blind person, for example. And I think that's a very restrictive way of thinking about it, because if you think that making your site accessible will only benefit a blind user, then you can use the excuse of, oh, well, there's nobody blind using my website, right? So why would I even bother with doing that? But like I said, what I try and say is that it's not just about that. Mm-hmm. It's about the fact that you don't actually necessarily know how people are using your sites. And it's not only like a blind user, it's like a multitude of different people. And I also try and point out things like that there are what's called like temporary and situational disabilities, where it's like a person that does not have a permanent disability, but is either in a temporary or situational case where they are, I guess, acting as in the same way that a person with disability is. So for example, I say like, okay, if you think about on the extreme end, somebody who's like completely blind, right? So a temporary disability might just be, oh, I got laser surgery, right? And I can't really focus on using my thing all the time. And side note, I watch a lot of YouTube videos and I watch a lot of laser surgery YouTube videos, like people who just went through and they're like, oh, their experience, because I'm thinking of getting it, not just because I have some crazy like interest in this, because I'm thinking of getting one. And then what they always say, what I always notice is like, oh, so they had to use Siri for a week because like they needed to like let their eyes rest. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. And they always point out how many things like might break for them because they have to use Siri, and it's like, oh, this completely different world. And then there's like the situational disabilities, where you're just in a particular situation that is like causing you to act in a specific way. So an extreme example is or a extreme example of a permanent disability is somebody that might be completely deaf, but then a situational disability is that maybe you're like at a club or something, and there's lots of noise, but you still want to be able to use something, and it's like, oh, why doesn't this work? Because they're not thinking about the fact that people might be using it in different cases. So it's about kind of like opening your understanding of what making an accessible website is, and just realizing that if you make a site that's accessible for even the most extreme cases that you might think that person is never going to visit my site, but even if you make it if you make it good for them, then you're making it better for everyone else on the spectrum, even the people who are just using it in the typical way that you might expect.
And is it more something about the person using the website, or like navigating the website, or is it also about the device they use?
Yeah, so I think that that does come into it, but it's more about, I guess, how they interact with the device, right? So the example I always give is that they're not using their mouse, they're using like their keyboard or screen reader or any other thing. And obviously different devices come into play, but I think when you think about maybe more low-end devices, then I think that's more like performance or progressive enhancement type of topic, but accessibility is more about, even if they're all on the latest device, how are they actually using that device? Yeah.
And something that like that I found very interesting is like, even if you go to very big websites that like serve a lot of people, and you actually try to use tab to navigate, some of them are unusable. Like it's crazy.
Yeah. And there was like a few articles going around recently about how so many companies are actually losing significant amounts of money because when people try and get to the checkout, the button doesn't work or something like that. It's like, or something so simple as they're not even using like an actual button element, or they're not labeling things correctly. And it's just like, there's money on the table and it's not even that difficult a fix. It's just use the correct element, right?
And I guess also like countries are trying to do something about it, because I was talking to a big retailer, and I won't say who they are because their site wasn't accessible.
Okay.
And they told me that in the United States they had to pay a fine because it wasn't accessible, and it was less costly for them to pay this fine instead of like redoing the whole website.
Wow.
So even if like states try to do that, for some companies it's like very hard, and they still don't put the right efforts to make their websites accessible.
Interesting. Well, because I heard that there was a EU law that was coming out, but I think it was more focused on government websites that had to be accessible. But I'm hoping anyway that like maybe those kind of fines will apply like yearly or something. So at a certain point, it would actually cost you less to just like build the site properly. But like you mentioned, it's going to be really difficult if they have to do it at that point, right? If they've already built the site and they're trying to decide between literally having to just restart or paying a fine. And I can't even really blame them for choosing the fine, because they are so deep in this problem that it will be so much more difficult to like just tear everything down and be like, okay, now we're going to start afresh. And that's why I always say it's like better to have this in mind from the beginning, so you're not really caught in that kind of decision.
And also, I guess, because something that I saw is that a lot of front-end developers are really like sensitive to this kind of issues, and they know it's important also, because I think they watch a lot of talks and they read a lot about this. But I guess it's an issue that everyone should be involved in, even like people who write the content themselves, like writing text or like titles that say actually what is in the page, and not just say something that is like interesting, like or can trigger the intention of someone, but still is not really informative. So there's also an issue about like making it the focus of everyone and not just the developer, because it's really hard to do everything yourself. So
yeah, that's definitely the case, and it is definitely really important that everyone understands how important it is, because another thing is that if it's only down to the developer, then they're already under this constraint of, we need to get this out by X date, and you're like, they're trying to like make it accessible, but if nobody else understands why this is important, then you're not really given the time, or people are not saying this is important for you to spend your time doing. So it's definitely something everybody at all the stages needs to be aware of.
And also, I guess that sometimes it might be a bit too late for the developer. Like if you think of, they get a design, but the design also needs to be accessible in terms of like which color do you use, what is the size of the text that you write. So like it's something that maybe happens even before the project reaches the developer. So what are the kind of things that you need to be careful about in the design in terms of accessibility? Do you have some examples?
Yeah, so what you mentioned is good. Like colors is really important. Making sure like contrast is good. I think that's probably one of the things that a lot of designs really fall on, is that they use colors that don't have enough contrast, so people can't really see it that well. Things like you said, text sizes, but also in the design language that people use. So, I mean, I mentioned colors, but making sure that you're not only representing information in colors. So having two things that are identical, one is like delete everything. One is like save everything, and if you're
just
only,
the color that makes the difference.
Yeah, exactly. The color is the only thing that makes a difference. Then that is obviously going to be a huge problem for people who might not be able to see the difference between those colors. And besides the more design aspects of that, there's also like the actual user experience and the interface, and just looking at the patterns that you're doing. So how do people actually take certain actions, making sure there's things that like I mentioned with the delete everything, making sure it's not like you just click one button and then everything deletes. Like having being aware that like people might need extra guidance and stuff like that. So yeah.
I think it was some kind of trend at some point. People were counting that they were trying to reduce the number of clicks people need to do to achieve the task.
Yeah.
And so they wanted, like, they had this idea in mind that the less clicks you put in your website, the more fluid or like smooth the experience will be.
Yeah.
But actually, for some, you need to add.
Exactly. And that's why I say it's about making it work for as many people as possible, and not just think about, I mean, unless you're building a tool that is specifically only for a like certain category of people. If you're just building something for the general public, you need to think, okay, well, maybe web designers don't mind just clicking one button and everything goes up in flames. But if you think about the average population, most people would probably need more than just that. Yeah. So yeah.
And are there some tools or resources people can look at, like at the beginning of their projects, or like once they did a website, like different stages, to just make sure they are respecting some guidelines and they're on the good track?
Yeah, so I think a great resource is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a document that, I mean, in the name, it's accessibility guidelines. So it just says different things to be aware of. So things like I was mentioning, colors and contrast, it gives you specific like values that you can test against to see, am I passing or am I failing? And that's really great to know of at the design stage. And then when you get to the development stage, or if you already have a website and you want to see how it works, you can use tools like, one I really enjoy using is called Pally. And it allows you to, you just pass in a URL. It's like a command line tool, and it'll output a complete report of, I mean, complete is probably not accurate because I don't think you can ever be 100% complete, but a pretty thorough reports on all the different things that you need to be aware of. And it will even rank for you in terms of, okay, this is things you really should fix like right now. And then it will be like, okay, this, if you have time, you can fix it. And then the others is just like, oh, just be aware. And if you're really bored, you can like spend your time doing all of that. So I think tools like that, and there are actually a lot of different tools that you can use to generate these reports. So I think starting from there is a good way to know like where you are right now, and then you can just like, okay, if you are at a point where you have like 50 different errors on this page, you can say, okay, by X date, let's bring this down to like 40 or 30, and just be kind of making more improvements, because I think people are also really put off by the fact that they don't think they can make a 100% accessible website.
Yeah, they see it like a huge work and thing.
Yeah, and the thing I just always like to say is that it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just make small improvements. And I'm not even going to say that any of my websites are like 100% perfect, but I'm just like, if I learn something new, then I go back and try and improve it. And even like I said, a lot of things are quite like small. So something I say is that, okay, so just go to your website and put the language attributes on the HTML elements. Like that's one thing you can do that will make an improvement today.
Because that's good for the screen reader to know like which language it needs to read in.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So little things like that that are good to just kind of get you on the path is great. And you don't need to think that, you don't need to be put off by the fact that it's not going to be 100% perfect, because I don't think anything is 100% perfect.
Yes, and of course, even maybe you as a developer, if you don't have these issues, it's hard to see. You need to have this list of all the things you need to check. I don't think like anyone could have guessed that they need to try to have like a screen reader on their website before it was something that's suggested by someone else.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course there will be always new things to add.
Yeah.
So It's like an ongoing process. It's not like
Yeah.
when the website is done, it's done. Like you need to also consider it as something is ongoing.
Yeah, the same way your website will actually never be done. It will also never be 100% performant, 100% accessible, all of that stuff. They're just ideals, I guess. Like even with stuff like Lighthouse, which is a really nice tool because it's already like in your browser in Chrome. If you use that, you can do an accessibility test there too. Even though they do give you like a score out of 100, you can have 100% score. I think somebody showed, I can't remember the article or something. They showed that you can get 100%, but there's still going to be some problems there.
Oh, you can get to 100% today, but not tomorrow because they will discover something else.
Exactly. So it's just about doing the best you can and not like feeling defeated by the fact that it's not perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe next video we can like look at specific items that you can work on. Like for instance, you said using a button instead of a div, things like that. That's like people can reuse from now and like start looking for that for their own website. Cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.